10 years ago, going to the supermarket didn't feel like making a financial decision. Today, for millions of people, it does. A bag of groceries costs almost twice as much. Rent keeps climbing. Buying a home feels impossible. Even a simple cup of coffee seems more expensive than it used to be. And yet, people are still working, still getting paid, still doing everything they were told to do. So why does it feel like money buys less every single year? Is inflation really the whole story? Or is something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Hello, I'm Olivia Vale, and welcome to Nexoryth. If you're interested in understanding money, business, psychology, economics, and the hidden systems shaping modern life, make sure to subscribe now. Every week, we break down the economic forces that affect your daily life in a way that's simple, practical, and backed by real-world thinking, not headlines or empty financial advice. And I strongly encourage you to stay until the very end of this video, because the final idea may completely change the way you think about rising prices. You might discover that the biggest reason everything feels more expensive today isn't the one most people are talking about. Today, we're going beyond inflation. We're going to explore why your paycheck doesn't seem to stretch as far as it used to, why everyday life has quietly become more expensive, and why millions of people around the world feel like they're running faster just to stand still. Because once you understand what's really happening, you'll stop asking, why is everything so expensive? And you'll start asking a much more important question. Who benefits when everything becomes more expensive? 1. The silent theft happening every day. Most people think prices suddenly become more expensive overnight, but that's almost never how it happens. Instead, it happens so slowly that you barely notice it. One week, your favorite cereal costs a little more. A few months later, your electricity bill goes up. Then your rent increases. Insurance becomes more expensive. Gas costs a little more than you remember. Streaming subscriptions quietly raise their monthly fee. Eating out becomes something you think twice about. None of these changes seem dramatic on their own. In fact, many of them are so small that people simply accept them. They tell themselves, it's only $1. It's just a few percent. It's happening everywhere. And that's exactly why rising prices are so powerful. Not because they shock people, but because they slowly reshape what people consider normal. Think about this for a moment. If someone suddenly doubled the price of everything tomorrow morning, people would panic. There would be outrage, news headlines, political debates. Businesses would struggle to explain themselves. But when prices rise little by little, month after month, year after year, most people simply adjust. They complain for a moment, then continue with their lives. That's why inflation is often called an invisible tax. Unlike ordinary taxes, you don't receive a bill in the mail. Nobody sends you an invoice saying, we're taking away some of your purchasing power today. It simply happens, quietly, every single day. Imagine you saved $10,000 5 years ago. The number in your bank account might still say $10,000 today. Nothing appears to have changed. But what that money can actually buy has changed dramatically. The money didn't disappear. Its purchasing power did. And that's an important difference, because most people focus on how much money they have. Very few pay attention to what that money is capable of buying. That's the real measure of wealth. Not the number on a screen, but the life those numbers can actually provide. Now, here's where many people become confused. They think inflation means companies simply become greedy. Reality is far more complicated. Businesses face higher transportation costs, higher wages, higher energy prices, more expensive raw materials, higher interest rates on borrowed money. Those additional costs don't simply disappear. Eventually, they reach the customer. Sometimes businesses absorb part of those costs, but they can't do that forever. Sooner or later, prices rise. And then another interesting cycle begins. Workers notice everything becoming more expensive. They ask for higher salaries. Companies now have higher labor costs. Some businesses increase prices again to cover those higher wages. Consumers face another round of price increases. The cycle continues. This doesn't happen because everyone is acting maliciously. It's often the natural result of millions of individual decisions interacting throughout the economy. But here's the part most people overlook. Even when your salary increases, you may not actually become wealthier. Imagine your income rises by 5%. Sounds like good news. But if the overall cost of living rises by 7%, you're actually losing ground. On paper, you're earning more. In reality, your money is buying less. That's why so many people feel stuck today. They're working harder, receiving raises, celebrating promotions, yet somehow their financial stress hasn't disappeared. Because income alone tells only half the story. Purchasing power tells the other half. And purchasing power is what determines your everyday life. It's the difference between comfortably filling your grocery cart or putting items back before reaching the checkout. It's the difference between saving for the future or using your savings just to make it through the month. This is why millions of people around the world share the same feeling. I make more money than I did a few years ago, but somehow life feels harder. That feeling isn't imaginary. It's the result of something quietly happening beneath the surface of the economy. The money in your wallet may look the same, but its strength, its ability to support your life, is constantly changing. And understanding why that happens is the first step toward understanding why everything around you suddenly feels so much more expensive. 2. Why your paycheck doesn't feel bigger anymore. Have you ever received a raise, looked at your new paycheck, felt excited for a few weeks, and then wondered where all the extra money went? You're not alone. In fact, millions of people experience exactly the same thing. Their salary increases. Their bank account receives a little more every month. Yet somehow, their financial life barely changes. The extra income disappears almost as quickly as it arrives. So what happened? Did they suddenly become bad at managing money? Usually no. The answer is much deeper than that. The truth is that your paycheck doesn't exist in isolation. It exists inside an economy that is constantly changing. Every time your employer gives you a raise, the world around that paycheck may also be getting more expensive. Groceries cost more. Electricity costs more. Healthcare becomes more expensive. Insurance premiums increase. Rent goes up. Transportation becomes more expensive. Restaurants quietly raise their prices. Even the products you buy every week may contain less than they used to. Have you noticed that some chocolate bars are smaller? Some cereal boxes feel lighter? Some packages look exactly the same, but contain fewer grams than before? There's actually a name for this. It's called shrinkflation. Instead of raising the price, companies reduce the amount of product inside the package. The price stays almost the same, but the value quietly decreases. Most people don't even notice it. And when they do, it's usually months later. This is one reason why life feels more expensive even when prices don't appear to change dramatically. But there's another reason that's even more powerful. Expectations. Think about life 20 years ago. Many families paid for a house, a car, utilities, and groceries. Today, those same families often pay for dozens of additional monthly expenses. Streaming services, cloud storage, music subscriptions, internet upgrades, phone plans, software subscriptions, online memberships, food delivery apps, digital services that didn't even exist a generation ago. Individually, they don't seem expensive. $10 here, $15 there, $20 somewhere else. But together, they quietly become hundreds of dollars every month. This is something economists sometimes call the subscription economy. Businesses have learned that charging customers a small amount every month often feels less painful than asking for one large payment. And because each subscription seems affordable, people rarely stop to calculate the total. Imagine filling a bucket with drops of water. One drop doesn't matter. Neither do 10. But after thousands of drops, the bucket is completely full. Monthly expenses work exactly the same way. They're rarely overwhelming individually. They're overwhelming collectively. Now add inflation on top of that. Suddenly, your paycheck has to support not only higher prices, but also a lifestyle filled with recurring costs that previous generations never had. And that's before unexpected expenses even appear. A medical emergency, a car repair, a broken appliance, an increase in mortgage rates. One unexpected event can erase months of careful budgeting. This constant pressure creates something many people experience every day: financial fatigue. It's not simply about being broke. It's the exhausting feeling that no matter how responsible you try to be, there's always another expense waiting around the corner. That's why so many people say, "I don't understand where my money goes." The truth is, their money isn't disappearing. It's being divided into more and more pieces. Each expense seems reasonable on its own, but together, they slowly reduce the amount of financial freedom left at the end of each month. This is one of the biggest differences between earning money and keeping purchasing power. A higher salary doesn't automatically mean a better financial life. What matters is how much of that income remains after the rising cost of simply existing. And for millions of people today, that remaining amount is becoming smaller every year, which raises an even bigger question. If everyday life keeps becoming more expensive, who or what is actually driving those rising costs? Because once you understand that answer, you begin to see that inflation is only one piece of a much larger picture. 3. The hidden forces pushing prices higher. When people talk about rising prices, they usually point to one simple explanation: inflation. And while inflation is certainly part of the story, it's far from the whole story. The economy is much more like a giant machine. Thousands of moving parts are connected together. When one part changes, the effects spread everywhere. Let's start with something surprisingly simple: energy. Almost everything you buy depends on energy at some point. Farmers need fuel for tractors. Factories need electricity to produce goods. Trucks need diesel to transport products. Cargo ships need fuel to move containers across oceans. Airplanes need fuel to deliver goods quickly. Even warehouses require electricity to operate. Now, imagine energy prices suddenly increase. That doesn't only affect gas stations. It affects nearly every product in the economy. The cost of producing and transporting goods becomes higher. Eventually, those higher costs reach store shelves. And that's only one piece of the puzzle. Now think about global supply chains. Years ago, companies discovered that manufacturing products in different countries could reduce costs. A phone might be designed in one country, its chips manufactured in another, its screen produced somewhere else, and finally assembled thousands of miles away before reaching your local store. This system made products cheaper for many years, but it also made the global economy incredibly interconnected. If one important factory shuts down, if a major shipping route is disrupted, or if international trade slows down, the effects don't stay in one country. They spread across the entire world. Suddenly, businesses wait longer for materials. Production slows, inventories become smaller. And when supply becomes limited while demand remains strong, prices usually rise. It's one of the oldest economic principles there is. When something becomes harder to obtain, it often becomes more expensive. Then there's another factor people rarely consider: interest rates. At first glance, interest rates don't seem connected to the price of groceries or everyday products, but they influence almost everything. Businesses borrow money to expand, to build factories, to purchase equipment, to hire employees, to invest in new technology. When borrowing becomes more expensive, many companies face higher operating costs. Some postpone investments, others reduce hiring, and many eventually pass part of those costs on to consumers. Now think about housing. When mortgage rates increase, buying a home becomes more expensive for many families. Some decide to keep renting instead. As more people compete for rental properties, rent prices can also increase. Suddenly, higher interest rates begin affecting people who never planned to buy a home in the first place. The connections are everywhere. And then there's human behavior. During uncertain times, people often react emotionally. If they believe prices will continue rising, many rush to buy products before they become even more expensive. Businesses see stronger demand. Some raise prices further. Other consumers notice those increases and begin buying sooner as well. Sometimes expectations themselves become part of the reason prices continue climbing. It's a fascinating cycle. Not because people are irrational, but because uncertainty changes the way everyone makes decisions. Governments, businesses, investors, families all react to the same economic signals, and every reaction influences someone else. This is why explaining expensive living with a single sentence is almost impossible. It's not just inflation. It's not just corporate greed. It's not just government policy. It's not just supply chains. It's the interaction of dozens of economic forces happening simultaneously. Like waves in the ocean, they overlap. Some become stronger. Others fade. But together, they create the economic reality we all experience. And here's what makes today's situation feel particularly frustrating. For decades, many people became accustomed to relatively stable prices. Life felt predictable. A monthly budget could last for years with only small adjustments. Today, that predictability has weakened. Families have to rethink expenses more often. Businesses adjust prices more frequently. Consumers constantly compare costs. Financial uncertainty has become part of everyday life. And uncertainty carries its own cost. It changes how people save, how they invest, how they spend, even how they think about the future. Because when you're unsure what things will cost next year, planning becomes much harder. But perhaps the biggest surprise isn't that prices have increased. It's that many of us still judge today's economy using expectations that belonged to yesterday's world, and that may be the most expensive mistake of all. 4. What smart people do when everything gets more expensive. By now, you might be wondering something important. If rising prices are influenced by global markets, energy costs, interest rates, and forces that no single person can control, what can anyone actually do? The honest answer is, you probably can't control the economy, but you can control how you respond to it. And that difference is more powerful than most people realize. History shows that every economic period creates two groups of people. The first group spends most of its energy reacting. Every price increase feels like another setback. Every news headline creates more fear. Every financial challenge becomes another reason to wait. The second group pays attention. They don't ignore reality, but they also don't allow it to control every decision they make. Instead of asking, why is everything getting so expensive? They begin asking, how can I become more valuable in a more expensive world? That small change in thinking often changes everything. Because while prices rise, skills can also become more valuable. Knowledge can become more valuable. Experience can become more valuable. The economy is constantly changing, and the people who continue learning usually adapt faster than those who don't. Think about someone who relies on a single source of income. If their living costs increase, they have only one way to solve the problem: work more. Now think about someone who is invested in valuable skills. Maybe they've learned digital marketing, programming, sales, design, writing, a second language, or another ability that businesses are willing to pay for. That person doesn't just have a job. They have options, and options are one of the most valuable assets during uncertain times. Another habit separates financially resilient people from everyone else. They pay attention to small decisions. Not because small decisions make them rich overnight, but because repeated decisions shape long-term outcomes. Buying something because it's on sale isn't always saving money. It's only saving money if you were already planning to buy it. Upgrading your phone every year isn't necessarily expensive, but doing it repeatedly for 10 years can quietly cost thousands. Ordering food a few times each week doesn't seem significant until you calculate what it adds up to over 5 years. The point isn't to stop enjoying life. The point is to become intentional, because intentional spending creates room for intentional saving, and intentional saving creates future opportunities. There's another lesson that often surprises people. The wealthiest individuals aren't always the ones with the highest incomes. Many people earning impressive salaries still struggle financially because their expenses rise just as quickly. At the same time, some people with modest incomes quietly build financial security through patience, discipline, and consistent decisions. Income matters, but behavior often matters more. That's why financial education is so valuable. Schools teach mathematics, science, history, languages. All of those subjects are important. Yet many people finish years of education without ever learning how inflation affects savings, how compound growth works, how debt influences long-term wealth, or how purchasing power quietly changes over time. As a result, many people spend decades learning these lessons through experience instead of education, sometimes at a very high cost. But perhaps the most important habit of all is maintaining perspective. Economic cycles have always existed. Periods of rising prices, periods of recession, periods of rapid growth, periods of uncertainty. Every generation believes its challenges are unique, and while today's world certainly has its own problems, history reminds us that economies are constantly evolving. The people who succeed over the long term aren't necessarily the ones who predict every economic change. They're the ones who prepare for uncertainty before it arrives. They build emergency savings. They continue learning. They avoid unnecessary debt whenever possible. They think years ahead, instead of only until the next paycheck. Because real financial confidence doesn't come from believing nothing will go wrong. It comes from knowing you'll be ready if it does. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. You don't become financially stronger by hoping prices fall. You become financially stronger by becoming more adaptable than the challenges around you. Because in a world where everything keeps changing, adaptability may be the most valuable currency you can ever possess. 5. The truth about expensive living and where we go from here. So, why does everything feel more expensive? After everything we've explored, the answer is probably very different from what most people expect. It's not just inflation. It's not just higher wages. It's not just corporate profits. It's not just government policy. It's not just global events. It's all of these forces interacting at the same time. Like gears inside a giant machine, they constantly influence one another. And whether we notice it or not, they eventually influence us. The price of the food we eat, the rent we pay, the homes we dream of buying, the vacations we postpone, the amount we save, even the way we think about our future. That's why this conversation isn't really about prices. It's about purchasing power. It's about financial confidence. It's about understanding the economic world we live in instead of simply reacting to it. Because once you understand why something is happening, it becomes much easier to make better decisions. You stop chasing easy explanations. You stop believing every dramatic headline. And you begin looking at money with a clearer perspective. That doesn't mean life suddenly becomes cheap again. It doesn't mean groceries cost less tomorrow, or that rent magically falls. But it does mean you stop feeling powerless. Knowledge doesn't eliminate economic challenges. It helps you navigate them. Think about a sailor crossing the ocean. He can't control the wind. He can't stop the waves. He can't change the weather. But by understanding how the sea works, he dramatically improves his chances of reaching his destination. Money works in much the same way. You can't control inflation. You can't control global energy prices. You can't control interest rates. You can't control political decisions made on the other side of the world. But you can understand how those forces affect your life. And once you understand them, your decisions become calmer, smarter, more intentional. Instead of asking, Why is life becoming impossible? You begin asking, what can I control today? Can I improve my skills? Can I spend more intentionally? Can I avoid unnecessary debt? Can I build an emergency fund? Can I invest in my future instead of only consuming in the present? Those questions don't promise overnight wealth. But over time, they create something far more valuable: resilience. Because every generation faces economic challenges. Previous generations experienced recessions, oil crises, housing crashes, financial bubbles, periods of high inflation. And today's generation faces its own unique pressures. The details may change, but one lesson remains remarkably consistent. The people who adapt are usually the ones who recover the fastest, not because they know the future, but because they prepare for uncertainty instead of pretending it doesn't exist. And perhaps that's the most important lesson this entire discussion can offer. Financial security isn't built by waiting for perfect economic conditions. Those conditions rarely exist. It's built by making thoughtful decisions, especially when times feel uncertain. By focusing on what you can influence, instead of becoming overwhelmed by everything you can't. Because while you may not control the economy, you can control your habits, your mindset, your knowledge, your priorities. And over the course of years, those choices often matter far more than a single economic cycle. So the next time someone says, everything is just getting too expensive, remember this. Higher prices are only part of the story. The bigger story is understanding how the world around you is changing and learning how to change with it. Because the goal isn't simply to survive an expensive world. It's to become the kind of person who can thrive in one. If you enjoyed this video and want to better understand money, business, psychology, economics, and the hidden forces shaping modern life, make sure to subscribe to Nexoryth. And before you leave, I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think has had the biggest impact on the rising cost of living, inflation, housing, energy prices, government policies, or consumer spending? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might start an interesting conversation. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop learning how the world really works.